Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for our Start by Believing Roundtable discussion. I'm Holly Caratanudo. I am the Sexual Assault Outreach Coordinator with Palm Beach County Victim Services, and I am joined today by individuals from our Sexual Assault Response Team, our Community Action Network. We are going to let them introduce themselves in a few minutes. First, I wanted to briefly talk with you all about Palm Beach County Victim Services for those of you who are unfamiliar with the services that we provide. Okay, so we are actually located throughout Palm Beach County. We have 5 office locations. We're at the main courthouse in West Palm, the South County Courthouse in Delray Beach, the North County Courthouse in Palm Beach Gardens. We are out in Belle Glade at the West County Governmental Center on the 2nd floor. And I actually work out of the SART Center, which is our Sexual Assault Response Team on 45th Street and Australian Ave in West Palm Beach. Currently, our lobbies are open. We are following along with the county mandate that you have to wear masks inside of our building. We are all wearing masks and we're social distancing, but our lobbies are open. We are continuing to serve victims of crime 24/7. We provide free comprehensive services to victims of stalking, sexual assault, human trafficking, dating violence, domestic violence, survivors of homicide and DUI fatalities, general crime and other violent crimes. We know during the past few months, there's been a lot of talk about domestic violence, so we are continuing to serve those victims along with these other forms of violence as well. Crisis response is one of our services. It's 24/7. We do forensic examinations, which is commonly referred to as the rape kit, forensic interviews. We assist law enforcement at crime scenes and death notifications. We provide advocacy. Our sexual assault counselors have privilege, meaning that per Florida statute, they do not have to disclose information to anyone that the sexual violence victim may tell them. We will go with victims to depositions, hearings, sentencing. We'll work with them on their victim impact statements. Florida crime compensation is eligible for people that actually report to law enforcement, and we can help them with that paperwork. We assist with relocation. We've been doing a lot of safety planning right now over the phone. And of course, we will go to file an injunction for protection with them. Our therapy services are also free. We have licensed master's level clinicians and registered interns. One important piece about our therapy is that there's no time frame on that. So this does not have to be an acute incident. This could have been something that happened 20 years ago. If that trauma is continuing to impact your life and you feel that you would benefit from therapy services, please call us. We are able to talk to those individuals that have experienced trauma throughout their lives. We provide professional training like the one that we are doing today throughout the county at no cost to community providers, hospital or medical teams, law enforcement, military programs. Basically, anywhere you want us, we'll come out and do professional trainings on our services, on sexual violence, human trafficking, domestic violence, whatever the topic is. If it relates to our services, we can provide training on that. So in terms of sexual violence services, our Butterfly House is an unmanned location out at Wellington Regional Medical Center, but it's a separate satellite location. This is very important during this time. We know that survivors of sexual violence may be scared to go to the emergency room during this time because they don't want to be exposed to anything. The Butterfly House is available to victims of sexual violence if there's no acute injuries, if they don't need medical care. They can come to the Butterfly House and we will complete the forensic medical exam. If they do have some sort of injury or need medical care, we do recommend that they go to the emergency room and receive that medical care, and then we can see them at the Butterfly House if they're discharged, or our SANEs and our advocates are mobile, they'll move to the hospital. It's operated by our team. It's unmanned, so we say always call first. An important thing about sexual violence is that we can now do these forensic exams up to 120 hours after a sexual assault. That is so important because we know that it can take 2 to 3 sleeps for someone to process a traumatic experience. And often we get a call from someone 3 days after the sexual assault has occurred, and they think that it's too late. And it's not too late. They can come in and have the evidence collected. There's a space for law enforcement to do a private interview there as well. It's a safe location. We have a shower. We have extra clothing. Sometimes law enforcement has to collect the clothing after a sexual assault, and we have them brand new clothing for them to wear home. Our sexual assault response team, or our SART team, is our community-wide multidisciplinary team that meets together monthly to ensure that our victims are getting all of the most comprehensive services available currently. We review any issues that have come up over the past month, problem solve. Countywide, we have a wonderful SART team, law enforcement, state attorneys, different community providers that come together and ensure all of the best services are being provided to victims of sexual violence in Palm Beach County. If you're interested in providing awareness and outreach about sexual violence in Palm Beach County, you should join our Community Action Network that meets monthly, the fourth Wednesday of every month. I'm going to provide my email address later, and you can send me an email and let me know you're interested in joining the Community Action Network, and I'll send you an invite. Our Green Dot program is a bystander intervention, anti-violence prevention program. Winter Jones is our program coordinator. And so if you're interested in Green Dot, you can send her an email. We actually have the virtual yoga for community healing happening tomorrow at 6:30 p.m. So if you're interested in that, you would just go to our Facebook page, find the event, and you can register. And it's free virtual yoga tomorrow at 6:30 p.m. And then there's 3 more dates in August. I'm going to give you these again at the end of this, but our helpline is 561-833-7273. That's available 24/7 to victims of crime. That is my email address if you want to ask me any questions or join any of our teams. And then, of course, you're following us on Facebook, follow us on Instagram, and follow us on Twitter. You can stay up to date on all of the events that are happening. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce you to some of our panelists now. Okay, so I'm going to start with Lisa. Can you give us a brief introduction on who you are and what you do?
Hi, my name is Lisa Allward. I am a SANE coordinator here at Palm Beach County Victim Services. I am located at the SART office. I respond to the victims of violence, sexual assault. We're called out by the advocates, and we're called out to do the actual forensic exam. There are 8 nurses here in Palm Beach County that respond to all 16 hospitals in Palm Beach County and our Butterfly House. So we'll respond, we'll meet with the victim, we will hear their statement and their story and collect evidence as needed. We're always able to respond, even times during COVID or anything else right now in the hospitals, that we are available 24/7 and to meet with victims and collect evidence.
Thanks so much, Lisa. You guys do a whole lot of work and have been very busy during this time, so we appreciate you.
Thank you.
All right, next we're going to move on to Sarah from Florida Atlantic University.
Hi, Holly. Thank you. So my name is Sarah. I'm Healthcare Health Promotion at Florida Atlantic University. We are the Prevention and Health Education Office. We work to provide comprehensive and holistic frameworks of health and well-being to our students, including workshops, events, online services and programs, and working with campus partners across the institution to enhance campus well-being, to include sexual and relationship violence, which is my personal area of expertise.
Great, thank you. And if you're not following some of the Florida Atlantic University social media accounts, they really stay busy. I'm always getting ideas and tips from them. So go ahead and follow them, especially on Instagram. They have a lot of accounts and a lot of information. All right, Detective Anderson from West Palm Beach Police Department.
Hi, I am Detective Molly Anderson. I work for the Special Victims Unit in the West Palm Beach Police Department. Special victims can be children, missing persons, and related to this, sexual abuse victims. So we investigate all those crimes.
Awesome, thank you so much. And Brianna from the State Attorney's Office.
Hi, my name is Brianna Coakley. I'm a prosecutor at the State Attorney's Office for the 15th Judicial Circuit, which comprised of Palm Beach County. The Special Victims Unit prosecutes crimes that include sexual violence against adults, children, as well as crimes against children.
Thank you. And Annie from Healthier Glades.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Annie Eichel. I'm the project director for Healthier Glades. which is a resident-led initiative funded by Palm Health Foundation with the focus on improving health outcomes by focusing on a specific area that the residents choose from. And for Glaze, we cover from Canal Point to South Bay, and we're focusing on behavioral health and trying to reduce the stigma of how residents feel about taking care of themselves, not only physically, but mentally as well.
Thank you for joining us, Annie. I know that you're very busy during this time right now out there in the Glades. We appreciate you all being here with us today. As you can see, our sexual assault response team and our community action network, we are representing multiple different entities and agencies, and we all come together to ensure that victims of sexual violence get the services and response that they deserve. I'm going to briefly share with you all a little bit about our Start by Believing campaign, which is really what this discussion is about today. So let me pull up my screen again. So our Start by Believing campaign actually started in 2016, and this is a national program that came from End Violence Against Women International, and Palm Beach County has been recognized nationally for our Start by Believing campaign, the work that we have done. As you can see, that is our director, Nicole Bishop, with State Attorney Dave Ehrenberg. He signed on to the Start by Believing campaign. In the upper corner, you see Sheriff Rick Bradshaw signing on to the campaign. And down in the bottom corner, you see County Commissioner Melissa McKinley signed on. And that was a proclamation, actually, that the County Commission did for Start by Believing back in 2016. So this isn't just something that is Palm Beach County Victim Services. This is multiple people agreeing that Start by Believing was needed in Palm Beach County and that this is the way that we should respond to sexual violence within our county. This is a quote. Start by Believing Day is April 1st, and we asked some of our survivor action team to come together and give us quotes about their experience with sexual violence and why Start by Believing is important to them. So this one came from Kat. She stated, "I've heard from many survivors who chose not to report at all because they feared a reaction from law enforcement similar to the ignorant interrogation I received. They asked me, why didn't you fight harder? And why didn't you scream for help? Reporting made me feel like I was a victim all over again, so it's no wonder to me that 85% of us never do. Start by believing it's the only way to change this sad reality." We heard this from so many survivors that this is why Palm Beach County has all come forward to agree, law enforcement, state attorney, community agencies, the colleges and universities, that we are going to have a different approach to sexual violence. We want to ensure that victims feel comfortable coming forward and reporting it. We want to improve outcomes for victim survivors. There's some statistics that I think are so important for people to understand that less than 3 out of 100 perpetrators of forcible rape are incarcerated. 3 out of 100. I think there's a huge misconception that when someone is sexually assaulted, the perpetrator goes directly to jail, and that's just not the case. Less than 20% of victim survivors even report to law enforcement, and less than half receive medical attention. And when they do report, it's often delayed. So we want to ensure that they have an easier process to access the criminal justice system and improve case outcomes. There are many reasons why victims don't report. These are just some of the most common. They fear retaliation or blame. They don't want others to know. Often we hear survivors saying, I don't want my parents to know. I don't want my partner to know. I don't want my employer to know. They're not even caring about themselves in this horrific moment. They're caring about the people in their lives. They might believe that there's not enough proof. We talked earlier about that 120 hours that our SANEs like Lisa have to collect that evidence. It's important that they are able to come forward. Another piece of that too is you don't necessarily have to report to law enforcement to come and have an exam done. If you're an adult, you're over 18, it's your choice whether or not you want to report to law enforcement. And we will actually complete the forensic medical exam, collect the evidence, and store it while you make that decision of whether or not you want to go forward with the case. This is fear of not being believed, shame of prior sexual assaults. Sadly, many of our victims have been sexually abused or sexually assaulted in the past, and they have such a shame from that prior sexual assault and how people responded to that they don't want to report this one. If you've watched the news recently, you know how victims can be vilified in high-profile cases. They're vilified on social media. how often do you hear someone say, well, what did she expect going to his house? Or maybe they shouldn't have drank so much alcohol, or they just wanted attention. Those statements are victim blaming. Those are the things that make victims not want to come forward. This is from the Start by Believing website. If you're interested in learning more about Start by Believing, it's startbybelieving.org. They have great free graphics. You can ask for action kits for your agency. This one says, there is no shame when a loved one is killed, when a home is lost, when a car is stolen. There is comfort and support. There is respect and sympathy. Yet when someone is sexually assaulted, there can be a different response. We're not asking for victims of sexual assault to be treated differently. We're asking that they be treated just like any other victim of crime, that they be believed and treated with respect and empathy. What does Start by Believing look like? It's more about the behavior and not so much of having to say, I believe you. I think people are often fearful of using those words of I believe you. And we're not asking for that. Often it's just your behavior, listening, not interrupting, allowing them to speak and giving them that space. Recognizing the emotion that they're experiencing, letting them know that you hear their frustration and you know that this is a difficult situation for them, letting them know that you're sorry that they experienced this, allowing them to make their own decision, giving them options, giving them the phone number to victim services or offering to call with them. Put down your cell phone, put it away, stay present with them. Don't be distracted by other things. Be in the moment and listen to what they have to say. Informal support, most victims seek informal support first, which is family and friends. I would say that people should almost practice responding when someone comes to you and says, this sexual assault happened to them. You know, I think sometimes we're fearful and we want to react and say, no way, this couldn't have happened to you. Instead say, I'm so sorry. How can I help you? If you respond in a positive way as an informal support to a friend or a family member, it increases the likelihood that they're going to seek formal supports. Our formal supports are our healthcare providers, counseling, our advocates, and law enforcement. If you get a positive reaction from an informal or formal support, we know that it reduces all of the negative symptoms of sexual violence and increases the likelihood that they're going to go forward, report to law enforcement, and have a positive outcome. The most positive effect came from simply being believed and having someone to talk to. Very simple. We're asking you to believe them and let them be able to talk to you. Be the support for them. All right, we're going to move into our roundtable discussion. I'm going to start with Detective Anderson. We know that law enforcement is often the first formal support that survivors encounter. What is that experience like for yourself as a detective or other officers when they first encounter a victim?
Well, 9 times out of 10, it's a patrol officer that's responding to the scene or however the victim decides to call. And I remember when I was on patrol, it can be very intimidating because you know you have certain questions that you need to ask in order to get what happened and the elements of the crime. But then you want to be sensitive to the fact of what the victim just went through. And the questions, they can seem invasive. But once a year, we have a training for all sworn officers. And the Special Victims Unit actually talks to the officers, all officers, and we just kind of describe to them, you know, what you can say, and don't be afraid to say certain things because you have to for, you know, determining what crime happened. And then detectives come in afterwards and we get more detailed and things like that.
Perfect, thank you. And I know I'm going to talk at the end about the Unbelievable series. It's on Netflix right now. And another thing is the Know My Name is a book by Chanel Miller. And in that book, she talks about how law enforcement never said sexual assault to her. So after she woke up in the hospital, she didn't know what happened. And they never said you might have been sexually assaulted. So she didn't know that for like days until someone finally said sexual assault. So it's very important for law enforcement to be clear about sexual assault and be able to say rape, sexual violence, and all those things that some young officers might not be comfortable saying. So I appreciate that you all go in and train those officers. All right, Lisa. Lisa works with our SANE nurses and also comes from the hospital setting and goes out to the hospitals in Palm Beach County and provides trainings as well. And in the hospital setting, do victims often immediately report a sexual assault, or do they often report some other medical concern or question? Lisa, I'm going to go ahead and unmute you. Go ahead.
So sorry. So sorry. So thank you, Holly, but good question. So as you said, half of the victims actually come forward or seek medical attention. So this proposes a large issue that we would like everybody to come forward if possible, but only half of the victims are seen in the ER. We'd like to change that. So, you know, sometimes a victim will come in or a patient will come in with other issues, pain, abdominal cramping, other things. If you give them the time and earn their trust, you know, it would help them open up and feel, create a better environment for them to open up to you and explain really what's going on. So, you know, we really want to, you know, the patient might look fine or might come in for other issues, but we really want to, like you say, open up that discussion and create an environment that is non-judgmental, that would help them to, you know, let them know, you know, be able to talk comfortably with us in a private setting. So, yeah, it's really depends, and we'd like to change that. And we encourage all hospitals to keep resources available to pass on to victims, even if they don't, you know, admit it might be a suspected issue, whether it's human trafficking or sexual assault. We want to keep those resource numbers available for victims to pass numbers on to them, and they could come forward later at another time, which is always great. But again, you want to keep that environment open and for them to have that discussion.
Yes, and we have plenty of resources. So if you work at a doctor's office or a hospital and you don't feel like you have enough to hand out to potential victims, you can contact us and we will happily drop off brochures and cards and information with our helpline for you to hand out, because sometimes that's all it takes is just, you know, that something probably happened and they're not ready to talk about it yet, and you can just hand them that brochure or card to let them know they have somewhere to call.
Exactly.
Thanks, Lisa. Okay, Sarah from Florida Atlantic University. We often hear about the high rate of sexual violence on campuses. What are some of the risks for individuals heading to college for the first time this fall?
Hi, Holly. So as everyone here is well aware, this fall looks incredibly different than any other fall we've ever seen before, which means that our risks also look different than what they've ever looked like before. Normally, heading into this time of year, we'd be working a lot with our fraternities and sororities and other RS organizations that might be facilitating parties and other high-risk environments. This year, we're looking at an environment where students are probably still going to be at home with their families, or they're more likely to be cohabitating with a partner, and experiencing a different level of risk in the context of social distancing and quarantining. So some of the unique risks that survivors might be experiencing right now, this comes from Sotira Solutions. I'll try to go through this quickly. We know that survivors are more likely to be in physical isolation with their abusers, which can be romantic partners or family members or even roommates. They're experiencing more social isolation from their friends or family members or people who might be able to spot or notice behavior changes or mood changes or other concerning behaviors that could be normally indicative that this person is undergoing distress. There might be increased use of alcohol or drug use in the home, which we know is correlated with increased risk of intimate or domestic violence. An abuser might be able to more easily control access to limited resources, both within the home, but also access to resources within the community. There is no normal within the new normal of COVID-19, and people might have heard of the term gaslighting, which is a form of manipulating a survivor's sense of reality and what's normal even in the behaviors between each other. So an abuser might be taking advantage of the fact that no one really knows how to psychologically contextualize what the new normal is right now, and we're all continuously adapting to that to be able to manipulate context of what normal looks like in that relationship to be able to justify further abuse. There's also increased financial strain, so that can create more tension, that can escalate abuse. Lack of access to mental and physical health care, which are spaces that survivors might go, as you just heard, to maybe they're not disclosing the sexual relationship violence right away, but they might be presenting with a different problem that could be uncovered with a few additional questions. There's lack of access to social care from not only your friends, but your support in your institutions, like going to school or having access to support groups. Housing insecurity. If you feel like, hey, if I leave this person, I have nowhere else to go, or I'm afraid of accessing public resources because of fear of getting the virus. And then even though we still have some shelter availability here in Palm Beach County, we know that there's some additional barriers with accessing them, or even just a heightened fear of what happens when you go and access a shelter right now and what are my health and safety concerns. And then the last risk we're looking at is, as people might be engaging in more long distance relationships, we see an increased use of sexual activity over digital platforms. So the need to further educate people about consent when you are the holder of that image, right? So what does it mean to be given the responsibility and care of someone else's explicit image, and to be respectful of that? There's going to be a lot of increased need to essentially talk about the etiquette and rules around things like sexting.
Perfect. Thank you, Sarah. I know with social distance, the students usually use you all as such a huge resource. So I'm glad to see that you guys are doing a lot more virtually to try and stay connected with the students. It's a difficult challenge, but I think it's something we're all working on, is like continuing that relationship virtually that we would have had in person. So thank you for all that. That's very helpful. Okay, Annie, too often victims of sexual violence are torn apart by media and the public at large. Any suggestions on how to respond to victim blaming when it happens by the people around you?
Yes. Well, first of all, let me state that I'm a social worker by profession. So I've had opportunities to work with folks that have been victims of assault. One of the things we want to do is make sure that you keep yourself an open mind. You don't know who may come to you and feel comfortable enough to share something that traumatic that happened to them. So you want to make sure that you keep an open mind, and also make sure that you recognize the person's feelings and not minimize or diminish what they're thinking and feeling. Another thing you want to do is make sure that you are giving them words of encouragement, words of support. Let them know that I'm here for you if you need anything. Sometimes because of when you're dealing with big sexual assault, because of the stigma that is attached to it, a lot of people are not comfortable talking about what led them in that position, and for the fear that they're going to be judged for what happened. The other thing you want to do too is make sure that you're providing them hope, letting them know that, you know, even though this has happened to you, you will get through it. This will pass. Also, make sure that you provide access, give them access to different resources and supports that are in the community. It's a little different in terms of big cities and small towns, because, you know, like for the Glaze, we're a small community. Everybody knows everyone. So having someone say that somebody that they know in the community sexually assaulted them, they also have to deal with the stigma of how the community will see them. But you also got to make sure that you let them know that what happened to you is not your fault. You didn't ask for this to happen to you. And you want to let them know that you can get justice for what happened. And just continue to be encouraging, be supportive, make sure you provide hope for them, and also give them access to resources. Sometimes a listening ear is all they need. Sometimes the victim just needs to talk it out. So just be present, recognize that these feelings are real, don't dismiss them, and offer as much support as you can.
Such a good point. I think sometimes we forget Palm Beach County, probably as a county, is considered a big urban area. But in reality, we're made up of a whole bunch of little small towns. And those small towns, when someone reports sexual violence by somebody else in that small town, it gets out, it gets known. And there's such a stigma with that. We hear about social media, people making comments about the victim and blaming them for what happened. So as professionals and as community members and as friends and family, we need to be the people who let that victim know that this was their fault and that we are here to support them and stand by them. So that's a huge important point to make, Annie, and I appreciate that. Thank you. Okay, Brianna from the State Attorney's Office. Victims are often hesitant to report because they don't want to face their perpetrator later in court. What is some advice you've given victims in the past?
Well, I realize and I recognize that for every single person, this is an intensely personal experience and it's different. But one of the first things that I usually tell a victim close to the time that they're going to testify is that it's not like it's on TV. And that usually is one of the biggest fears, that they see television shows and they think that they're going to be yelled at or screamed at, or that they're going to be harassed while they're on the stand. And that's highly unusual for something like that to happen during an actual trial. I also let them know that you're going to be, if and when you testify, you've already talked about this story so many times. You've already told your truth, and the hardest part is over. We're at the very end of this entire process. And I find that a lot of victims find that that moment that they get to go into court and actually tell their truth in front of a judge, in front of a jury, is actually an empowering moment. It's not as scary as it is on TV. And most importantly, it's not as scary as that person has built up in their head that the experience is going to be. It's a lot more contained. It's a lot more subdued. They're not going to be even remotely close to the offender. The offender is going to be in the room, but it's not something like that person is going to be able to threaten, harm, or intimidate them. This is their chance at the very end of the process to stand up for what happened to them. And I also make sure, and I think it's important to make sure that that person is prepared. They know what to expect. They know what they are going to be asked. They know what the courtroom looks like. They know where everyone's going to sit. And they know what that moment is going to feel like. And probably the last thing that I tell them that I hope is useful is that we're at the end of a process that was probably very long. In most cases, it takes about 2 years to get from the point where someone is arrested for a sexual assault to the point where a jury reaches a verdict. And I think that it's a relief sometimes to finally, after years, to get to that end point, to have went in front of a jury to tell your truth, and to stand up for what happened.
Yeah, I think that's a huge misconception about the length of time that it can take. And 2 years is about accurate, or what we see as well, of these cases from when you first report to when you actually get to that point where you're going to be in the courtroom. And it's a scary thing to think about, that it's going to take that long and the re-traumatization that happens. But it sounds like if they have the right supports around them and they're prepared, it can really lessen the amount that they're going to be re-traumatized by that. And I think, again, just starting by believing and being with them and supporting them through the process is the way for them to feel that this is their process and their story. And like you said, they feel relief afterwards. That relief must be so wonderful to feel, to be able to tell your story and say it your truth. Okay, Lisa, any advice to other health professionals on how best to support victims of sexual violence who need their services?
Okay. Yeah, sometimes again, healthcare professionals might be the first one to have contact with this person. And again, hospitals are busy places, ERs are a busy place, I know, and I just encourage anyone to slow down and take the time to actually listen to the patients. Sitting at eye level is something that seems so minor, but it's so important to create, again, that environment of trust for somebody to actually open up to you. Again, we want to offer all resources to our victims or patients with phone numbers. Again, they might not report now. And again, if they don't want to report, we could still collect the evidence. And Palm Beach County is so amazing that we hold evidence up to 4 years before you have to decide if you want to go forward with a case, and report to law enforcement. So we want them to know that, we can take this valuable evidence and information today but they don't have to make that decision if they want law enforcement involved. So a patient can come into the ER, law enforcement's not called or anything, and we can treat that person. And they can have 4 years to decide, and that's so important. But we always want to listen without judging is a huge, huge thing. Empower the patients to tell their story, and again, earn that trust and keep that, encourage that communication with them and keep supporting them.
Yes,
Yeah.
I think that the unreported hits are so important for people to be aware of, especially if it's been a partner that was involved in the sexual violence or a family member, or we talked about, Annie was talking about the small towns and you're not really sure what you want to do. The ability to collect that evidence now and think about what your options are as an adult is so important. So again, we always want to let people know that even if you're just considering reporting later, get that evidence collected today and ensure that that's protected. So thank you. Annie, we're going to come back to you and ask, what are some of the services available in the community for survivors? So specifically in the Glades, if you want to tell us about some of the services that are available out there or anywhere in Palm Beach County.
Well, as far as resources that are available, it depends on where you live, as you stated earlier. The first thing I would do is tell everybody to call 211. Because one of the things you could do is by calling 211, they can point you in the right direction of what services are available in your community. For the Glades specifically, we do have a victim services office at the West County area office that residents can have access to. We just had some changes within the past, I want to say year, with mental health services, because we used to have Jerome Golden, and I know it's now being taken over by South County mental health. So right now, if folks need professional help, they can do that as an option. Usually in small communities, they rely more on informal than formal supports. So like your churches, your different social clubs that you may be involved in, a close friend. Usually most of folks will go to their informal supports first before they go to formal. But I would say just check and see what resources are available in your community. And like I said, we're having to work with clients and having to work with victim services. I learned a lot in terms of what victim services have to offer that I didn't know before then. So we're very blessed to have them in our community so that residents know that they do have someone that can advocate for them on their behalf, particularly when I was working with families that were dealing with domestic violence, particularly. It was a great resource and support.
Yeah, and the churches is a big part of it as well. And again, informal supports, I think anyone should be prepared to be that informal support for a friend or a family member. And I think once you kind of put out that flag that you're a support and you let people know, and it's simple, during Sexual Assault Awareness Month, putting a teal ribbon on your social media, letting people know that you support victims of sexual violence, you'll hear stories from people. Anytime I go out and I talk about sexual violence, people come forward and tell me their story. So there's more people around you. And I think that's something that you should always keep in the back of your mind, is that there's people around you that have experienced sexual violence. And so when you're talking about a case in the media or you're talking about something that's in the news locally, remember that the people that hear you talking may have experienced their own sexual violence and that they might need you to be a support for them. Okay, and we're going to go to Detective Anderson. You talked about this a little bit already, but if you were training new law enforcement officers, how would you train them on interacting with a victim?
Well, one of the things that you need to have, officer, detective, supervisor, you got to have patience. The victim is going to be, sometimes they're emotional, sometimes they're not. Sometimes they beat around the bush to the fact that they talk about their childhood, they talk about things that aren't even really related, but they don't even know where to begin or end or what you need to hear. So you need to be patient and kind of guide them to what you need, and then also let them know, I'll listen to whatever you have to say, but this is what we need for this specific. You just got to be patient with them.
I saw Lisa nodding her head because I know even during the exam, sometimes you're asking them what happened and they're telling you about something that happened 10 years ago because they're still trying to process what just happened to them. So that patience is key of just being like, sometimes the exams can take hours because we really need to just get from point A to point B, and we're here to listen, and that's okay. And I'm sure your interviews go the same way. Sometimes they're just hours long because it takes them that long to get to where they're really ready to talk about what just happened to them. Brianna, how much of a difference does it make if law enforcement, community members, and providers all support and believe a victim through the criminal justice process?
It makes the difference between us being able to prosecute someone and not. It very much starts with that initial exposure that someone has to the system, and that's with law enforcement. And if law enforcement starts by believing even a story that sounds maybe initially unbelievable, it can lead to investigative tips and investigative strategies that result in us finding out information that we wouldn't have otherwise. It is probably the most important step in me being able to successfully prosecute a case, is that a law enforcement officer takes a victim seriously and makes them feel comfortable, so they'll want to continue to come forward and participate. And I think that's true, and it's important to note that sometimes, for reasons we can't prosecute a particular case. But years down the line, we know that people that perpetrate crimes of sexual assault do it more than once. And so we'll have a subsequent case where that individual victimized someone else. And we can go back to that first case and that first victim and hopefully have them cooperate in the subsequent prosecution. But that all falls apart, and that can't happen if that first victim's experience with law enforcement, with the state attorney's office, and with the entire process was so bad that they just say, no, go away, I'm not helping you now. And I've had both happen. I have a case right now where the first victim years ago that we couldn't prosecute said, no, I'm not helping you now, my experience was so bad. But then we've had the reverse happen, where years later, a decade later, that first victim was able to provide evidence and we're able to get justice in a way for both of them.
It sounds like part of the underlying theme that I'm hearing from a lot of you is trust. So Start by Believing creates that trust. And if victims can trust the people that are involved in their case, they're more likely to continue moving forward, and they're more likely to provide additional information that might help make that case. That's so important. And again, the other piece that you touched on, that perpetrators often have multiple victims. And if we can believe that first victim initially and reduce the chance of that perpetrator ever hurting anyone again in the future, we're doing our job. That's part of Start by Believing, because it helps take people that want to hurt other people off the street. Okay, we're going to end with Sarah. What are some of the options available to victims of sexual violence on campuses?
So I really like that you've been talking about formal and informal resolutions, Holly, because we've been focused on both. So in terms of formal options that we have here on campus, I want to always start by highlighting we do have a campus victim advocate. Her name is Candace. She is phenomenal and has worked over the last years to build really integral and meaningful relationships with faculty and staff across campus to provide the best possible accommodations, and has also worked internally to be revising policies to be survivor-centered, and has been a very strong voice for every survivor who enters our office. We also have our local police department as well, who Candace works very closely with and is involved in trainings. We have counseling and psychological services, which is free and confidential for all of our students. And if anyone's ever not sure exactly which resource they need or is right for them, we actually this past year have centralized our reporting option into a universal reporting page at fau.edu/report. So that way you can put in whatever type of concern you have, and it's automatically going to get routed to the person who can provide the best support and care. This is not a police report, so a student would still have the option to say at a later point, yes, I want this to be a criminal investigation or not, but it will immediately start to get them connected to resources and look at it from that angle, so that way a survivor can look at their options and talk about how they want to move forward. We are also really strategically considering how to make sure that peers on campus are equipped to be the best support that they can be. So using that start by believing language when we're educating students who might be bystanders and giving them skills to be creative about reaching out to other students during this time, such as finding covert ways to stay in touch. Maybe it's through a gaming interface or an app that you're communicating through, something that seems maybe more benign and less likely to be monitored. But then also using some normative data to not only get students to be more likely to engage in that empathy language, but to also help survivors know that if they were to disclose on campus, that we do have a campus culture where they're likely to be believed. If I'm a survivor and if I have the perception that if I come forward and I say something, someone's going to judge me for my behaviors, I might be less likely to speak up and come forward. But if I know the stat that 88% of my peers say that they would never put blame on me if I came forward and said something, well, now I know, like, not essentially 9 out of 10 of my friends would support me if I came forward. That feels like pretty good odds for me to speak up and then start to get access to those resources that I need, but really getting our students mobilized to be that first response on campus as well.
I love the online reporting aspect because that is what our world is turning into, especially for college-aged people. They're doing everything online. So that is a critical piece that I think is probably missing in a lot of other areas, is having that option to do some online reporting. So that's great. And then again, having that peer informal support is key. We need to have those people that are available and ready to help individuals who have experienced sexual violence. Well, I thank our panelists today. I'm going to actually share a little bit more about victim services before we wrap up. Let me just share my screen again here. So people always ask me, how do I learn more about Start by Believing and the campaigns that we have in Palm Beach County? Here. So if there's some documentaries on Netflix right now, these are the easiest ways to educate yourself. Athlete A is a Netflix documentary about the USA Gymnastics case involving Larry Nassar. Audrey and Daisy is specific to teen sexual violence. It involves alcohol, which I know Sarah had mentioned earlier is very key in our young sexual assaults. We see alcohol involved in a lot of those cases. On the Record, which is actually a HBO Max docu-series right now about sexual violence in the music industry. And then I mentioned this earlier, Unbelievable is a Netflix series. If you haven't watched it, it's based on true stories. They actually worked with the Start by Believing campaign to create this series. And you'll see if you watch it after watching today's talk, how critical it is to start by believing. There's some books to read. We had a book club back in April about Know My Name, which is Chanel Miller's book. That was the Stanford sexual assault case. And we're actually going to do that again in September. We're going to have another book club with the Palm Beach County Library. So follow us on Facebook for that event information. Another book that I recently read is also about the USA Gymnastics case. It's What is a Girl Worth by one of the survivors, Rachel Den Hollander. And again, it's to really understand what survivors experience after sexual violence. And we have an up and coming Teen Talk Week, which is going to be August 24th to the 29th. Those events are going to be coming up on Facebook pretty soon. There'll be an event every day of the week talking about sexual violence, victim blaming, and trafficking, specifically related to our teenagers and our adolescents as we head back to school. One last quote for you. I didn't know that being a victim was synonymous with not being believed. This is something we hear way too often from our victims. We no longer want them to feel like they're not going to be believed when they come forward and report sexual violence. Our helpline is there again. Please take a picture of this, write it down, screenshot it, 561-833-7273. Annie talked about calling 211. You can do that as well. You're still going to get connected with us 24/7. We have an advocate on call, a backup advocate, and an on-duty supervisor on call. So we are always available. Join our campaign at any time by just declaring to Start by Believing, letting people know we hear you, we see you, we believe you, and we have trainings available for anyone in the county on Start by Believing if you want to bring it to your agency. So again, thank you all so much for participating today. I think this was a ton of information, and please feel free to contact contact any of us if you have any questions or concerns. Thank you so much. Bye, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.